Hey guys, it's Jarek here, Dragon from Red Dragon Airsoft. We got a comparison video today, and I got a lot of questions. A lot of questions saying, what's the difference between the NS2 system and the regular gas blowback system? Is CO2 best for me? Should I get an AEP? So I'm going to fully go through every single one of these systems and explain it all out. I'm going to dumb it down a lot, so if you're an experienced airsofter, this is going to be a lot of old news for you. So let's start with the KJW Sig P226. Which this one is fully licensed by Cybergun, so it has all the real SIG trademarks. The way a standard gas blowback works, obviously, is it uses either green gas or propane, and you need to buy one of these propane adapters, generally around $20. Gas usually goes inside the magazine. Fill it up. Put some BBs right inside there. You got to keep them double stacked. Put the mag and just like a real one, you chamber around, and there's nothing in there, so it'll lock back. But you chamber around, and then every time you fire, it has blowback. And once you're out of BBs, it locks back. Standard maintenance: put about 3 drops of silicone oil right inside the actual head of the propane adapter. You just need to unscrew this. Put about 3 drops right in there, screw this back on, and you can fill it up. It's overall a very simple system, and it works just like a real one, so it's very realistic. Next, let's go to the NS2 system. The NS2 system works like your standard gas blowback. Fill it up with propane, everything else is the same as before. When you're filling all these up, you hold it down for about 5 seconds. Load in the mag, pull the slide back, out of BBs, it'll lock back. Where the difference between the NS2 system and your regular gas blowback comes in is that it's all internal. Really, it's the actual system itself. This uses a 2-stage system. What that means simply is that this is a lot more consistent when it's firing. It'll be a lot more efficient on gas. You won't have to load it with gas as much as you would the standard gas blowback. It works better in the cold, and overall it's just a better designed system. Externally, if you're looking at it, you really can't tell, because the NS2 system is only an internal design. However, the NS2 system is only used by KWA, and KWA makes some of the best externals, actually the best externals when it comes to gas blowbacks you're going to find around. KWA is the leading company for gas blowbacks. You're not going to find anyone else better. Everything they have is completely 1-to-1 scale. So it gives you a really realistic feeling. So generally, with an NS2, you're going to be spending somewhere around $10 to $30 more. However, you get what you pay for in airsoft, and it's completely worth it spending a little bit more just to get the NS2. Next, we're going to be looking at CO2 blowback. This works the same as your standard gas blowback. However, instead of using propane or green gas, it uses CO2, your 0.12 gram CO2 cartridges. And magazines vary a lot. See, this magazine looks a little different because it has a hole in the side where you take your CO2 cartridge like this, put it right in there, and then take an Allen wrench key, which I'll go get right now. Allen wrench key, and then you simply screw it in the bottom. Until you hear it leaking, screw it in more until the leaking stops. Like so. So now it's gassed up. The gas consumption on CO2 gas blowbacks it varies with each gun. With this gun, it's a large pistol. Other than that, though, the first thing I need to say is, other than that, everything else works the same. You load up the magazine with BBs, put it in, rack slide back, and it works identically to the other ones. The main differences, though, is that with CO2, there's a lot more PSI. The PSI is a lot higher in a 12-gram cartridge than just filling up a magazine full of propane. So everything has to be a lot stiffer. The gas flow valve, the trigger spring, the hammer spring, everything about it is a lot harder, including the heavier slides. If you get a plastic slide on one of these, chances are they're going to crack and they're going to break pretty quickly. So as you can see here, I know this is kind of a hard example because it's a Desert Eagle, and Desert Eagles are larger, so it's going to have even more recoil. But as a general idea with CO2 gas blowbacks, they're going to have a little bit more recoil, the slide's going to be a little heavier and everything else will be heavier. That's why CO2 and propane are usually not mixable. You usually can't take a green gas magazine and put it inside the Desert Eagle. There's only a few exceptions to that, like your high kappas. You can take a CO2 high kappa mag and put it in a green gas high kappa. That'll work, but for most you can't. And here's an example, and this one specifically shoots semi and full auto. Most don't, but KWC likes doing that. So here's an example, lots of recoil. It's out of BB, so it'll lock back. You can even see the CO2 shooting everywhere. Hold this down. And let's go full auto. So yeah, this thing has a lot of recoil, which can be a pro or a con depending on how you look at it. It has a lot of recoil, so if you go full auto, there's no way you're going to be able to control this thing. Even if you're on semi-automatic, it takes a little bit more time to realign your sights and accurately aim. Whereas with most others, they don't have this much recoil, but it still takes a little bit more time to actually accurately aim. Although this varies from gun to gun, but again, CO2 generally is going to have a little bit more recoil than plain green gas. Other than that, everything else works the same. Now let's move on to one that's vastly different from the other ones. This is an AEP, and obviously not all AEPs come with the laser this has on it. This one just comes with this specific gun. Now AEPs work a little bit differently, actually vastly differently. AEPs don't have blowback, the slide doesn't move while you're shooting it, the magazines look vastly different. And it doesn't even run off gas. What these work off, and AEP stands for automatic electric pistol, what these work off is one of these. Which this is only a 7.2 volt, 450 milliamp battery. And this is it. What they have done with an AEP is they took a whole gearbox and shrunk it into a pistol. This particular one uses the same gearbox as Tokimuri's original Glock 18 style gearbox, which means only one side of the selector switch moves, but it is also semi and full auto. All AEPs that have been released out on the market are semi and full auto. Now, there's a lot of pros and cons, but it really depends on the way you look at it. It doesn't have blowback, which in a lot of people, it's going to be a con. It doesn't have blowback, blowback is cool. But if you're looking at it from a logical standpoint, depending on what you're playing, that means you don't have recoil, which means it can be really easy to aim these things up. So that's always a plus. The other major plus you get is the fact that AEPs use a battery, so you're not going to get the cooldown function. See, with propane, when it's cold outside, they simply will not work to the best of their ability, if at all, depending on how cold it is. Propane is also majorly affected by the moisture level, and if you live in a place like a subtropical environment like here, they lock up a lot, and they really don't perform the best that they could. AEPs will never have that problem unless it really gets cold, when nothing will work to the best of its ability. So let me show you how this thing works. It depends on which gun, how to take off the slide, but usually just take off the slide and slide it in with the arrow pointing inward. And there you go. The magazine, the reason it's so skinny is because, like I said, they shrunk a whole gearbox into a pistol, so there has to be somewhere for the gears, motor, piston, etc., and that mostly goes in the back of the grip. These are very easy to load. You just need a speed loader, load them in, and then they're double stacked. Usually they hold about 30 BBs in there. Load it in, and then so they're very effective. And pros and cons completely depend on the way you look at it. See, if you live in an environment like this where it's cold most of the year, most likely it's going to be a pro the way AEPs work. But if you play a lot of milsim, stuff like that, you're probably not going to like AEPs. You're probably going to like something that's a little bit more realistic. Now I got one more AEP up here that's a good example is the Sig P226 AEP. There's quite a few AEPs in the market, but nowhere near the amount of difference you'll get with gas guns and such like that. There's a lot more variety when it comes to gas blowbacks. But with AEPs, there's only a few out. Right now, off the top of my head, an M93R, an M9, Glock 18, Sig P226, and the Desert Eagle. Pardon me if I'm forgetting any off the top of my head. So yes, and this one, as of right now, is really the best performing. It's only, the only bad thing about AEPs is the fact that they only shoot about 200 feet per second. But like I said, that's pretty good considering they shrunk a whole gearbox into a pistol. And that can also be considered as not a con, because they're still just as accurate as gas blowbacks, and I'll show that later in this video. But here we go, this one currently has the highest rate of fire. That's about 900 rounds a minute. This one's shooting about 700 rounds a minute, which is the average for AEPs. And they're both shooting about 200 feet per second. See, the hop-up units are your standard gearbox, AEG style hop-up units. Just a wheel right there, and they're very effective. So, the feet per second being low can't really be considered as too much of a con. It just means it's going to be getting there a little bit slower than gas blowbacks. Now, something else I neglected to mention, CO2 gas blowbacks aren't as affected by the cold as, say, your standard green gas blowbacks. However, they're still affected by it because they are blowback, and it can lock up, but nowhere near as fast as your gas gun will. So if you live in a colder environment, AEP or CO2 is going to be a best thought. If you really live in a cold environment, the best for you is going to either be a CO2 non-blowback or an AEP. So think about that one before you go out and buy something. Alright, so now I've really described each one and how they work. One thing I need to mention before I go on though, the feet per second completely depends on what gun you get. AEPs, all of them average around 200 feet per second, so those are pretty consistent and they shoot really consistent too. Gas guns completely depends on what gun you get and what company makes them. This one specifically is about 300 feet per second. The KWA NS2 shoots about 330, but all KWA NS2 shoots about 330. The CO2 blowback is going to be shooting roughly around the same as your gas blowback, so that's about 300 feet per second. And your AEPs, like I said, all of them shoot 200. So now we're going to go outside and we're going to be comparing all of these and see how well they do against each other. Now we're outside, we're on our accuracy test range, as you can see. We're going to be doing a few different comparisons. The first comparison is going to be an accuracy comparison between the regular KJW Sig P226, the standard version, the NS2 KWA Sig P226, and the CYMA AEP Sig P226. We're going to go all the way back at 150 feet because all three of these were actually well above accuracy when it comes straight down to it. So this is going to be a perfect comparison. The same exact gun, same size, same barrel length, all of them great above accuracy. It's going to be a great comparison to see what's going to be the most accurate and really see the best performance out of all of them. Now, where does the CO2 Desert Eagle and the AEP Desert Eagle come in? Well, CO2 Desert Eagle, CO2 blowbacks have almost the same exact performance as regular blowbacks that run on propane. So we're going to be doing a recoil demonstration showing how much recoil there really is with CO2 compared to your standard AEP, which actually plays more than you would think. So let's go ahead and get on to those tests. Alright, so we are all the way back 150 feet, zoomed in on a man-sized target. This is going to be your standard, well, actually this thing's a little bit smaller. It's the size of, say, it's a midget size. Let's just put it that way. It's a lot smaller than most people would be. However, it shows your target good enough to an actual reasonable target you're going to be shooting at from 150 feet away. So first one, this is going to be the KJW Sig P226. It's loaded. Well, let's start shooting 150 feet away. First one hit it. And we are out of BBs, but as you guys saw, this one's well above average when it comes to accuracy. Almost every single shot hit it. We had about a good 5 or 6 shots at the most that didn't hit it, but came close. And this is what the hop-up tuned up just a little bit upward. So overall, very accurate. Alright, so now it's time for the NS2 model, the KWA Sig P226. This one shoots about 330 feet per second, opposed to the KJW, which shoots about 300. So I got this one loaded with 0.23 gram BBs instead of 0.2s like I had with the KJW. Both these are shooting off propane, and it's about 75 degrees outside. So performance won't be the best, but it's definitely going to be a little bit better than normal Portland weather. So 150 feet away, man-sized target, let's start shooting. Okay, so the BBs are definitely a little bit more sporadic. I think .25s would have been something a little bit better to use. However, it did show that it is a little bit more consistent. When it did hit the target, it hit the same spot almost every single time, whereas the KJW kind of hit all around the target. You're still going to be able to hit the target, but the KWA is definitely a lot more consistent than the KJW is. Alright, now it's time for the CYMA Sig P226 AEP. Biggest difference here is that this one can also shoot full auto instead of semi-auto, so we'll be going full auto magazine next mag. For this one, let's stay semi-automatic just to keep it fair. So 150 feet away, 7.2 volt AEP style battery, 0.2 gram BBs, let's go. And we are out of BBs. So as you guys can see, it definitely shoots a little bit slower. It kind of floats them out there. But you can also see that the hop-up unit takes up a lot of the feet per second. This one only shoots about 200 feet per second, but it's still able to hit that target at 150 feet. It's going to get there slower, but if anything, this is the most accurate out of all of them. Now let's go full auto to see the major advantage that an AEP has. Alright, so now let's go full auto. And we're out of BBs. So as you guys can see, full auto is definitely a giant advantage, and the fact that it doesn't have blowback makes it a little bit easier to aim that full auto. So AEPs, if you ever hear someone say, well, it's shooting at a lower velocity, so it's not as accurate, go ahead and slap them and correct them and show them this video, because AEPs, even though they're shooting a little bit slower and it takes a little bit longer for them to actually hit the target, they're still just as accurate or more accurate than gas guns. Alright, so now we're zoomed out, and here is the recoil comparison. On my right hand, I got the CO2 KWC Desert Eagle. This is blowback, and this one also has the advantage of shooting full auto as well as semi-automatic. Let's stay on semi-auto first. On my left hand, I have the CYMA AEP Desert Eagle. This is also semi and full auto, but it doesn't have blowback. So let's go ahead and show you the recoil differences. So first semi-auto. I may have mentioned I'm also right-handed. Now let's go full auto, and this is really where you're going to be able to see the difference here. So as you can see, this gun has a lot of recoil. To be fair, this one is probably the most recoil I've ever felt in any blowback. However, CO2 gas blowbacks generally do have a little bit more recoil than gas gun gas blowbacks. Reason is PSI in 12 gram cartridges CO2 is a lot more than propane in a magazine. So it has to have a heavier recoil spring, heavier trigger spring, heavier gas flow valve. Everything in it has to be set up a lot more sturdy and generally means a little bit more recoil. And the fact that this one goes full auto doesn't help that. And now really to get that recoil point across, let's do some slow motion because you can see everything in slow motion. This is 300 frames a second. On the right is the KWC, on the left is the AEP. Now we're back inside in the studio, so let's go ahead and recap all of that and what just happened. So again, when we were comparing all the SIGs, let's go ahead and get these Desert Eagles out of the way here. So all of these SIGs, the KJW, which is the regular gas blowback, which costs somewhere around about 100, I believe 130 if I remember off the correct top of my head. This one definitely is accurate. All of them are above accuracy again. This isn't the most consistent way to shoot it out of the market, but it works, and it gets the job done at 150 feet. Pistols shouldn't be able to shoot that far, but you can definitely hit your target with this. NS2 is the most consistent out of all of them. It'll hit the same spot of your target every time, especially if you have it tuned in, you got some time to work on it. It's the most realistic one out there, the best kick, the best blowback, very fast blowback. And in fact, this model isn't even put on KWA's website because they want to ensure they have enough for the law enforcement to train with. So that says a lot about this one. This one costs about 20, 30 more than this one does, but it's worth the extra cost. And then the AEPs, which is vastly different than the other two. The AEPs shoot about 200 feet per second and get there slower, but they're matched up with KWA's accuracy. And if anything, surpass them in accuracy, even though they're shooting about 100 to 130 less feet per second. So it's really a testament to CYMA's hop-up unit. So AEPs rely almost completely on hop-up units, and all of them have a great design hop-up unit. So it's a big plus for AEPs out there. So you're really not sacrificing much accuracy, if any, at all by being a lower feet per second gun. So that total misconception of the AEPs shoot lower feet per second, so they're totally inaccurate, is wrong. You can have a gun shooting 500 feet per second and it can be inaccurate as hell. Another thing to mention, you can get, there's also rumors out there saying you can only get like 3 to 4 magazines out with an AEP. Those are actually very false rumors. You can actually get up to 14, 15 different magazines out before your rate of fire really starts to go low. And by rate of fire going low, I mean only about 100, say 100, 200 rate of fire slower. So you can get a lot out before you need to change out batteries, and changing out the battery is as simple as just pulling the slide off, popping out the battery, putting a new one in, then putting the slide back on. So if you have a few batteries, you're set for quite a few games because you're never going to be using your sidearm as a primary. Unless you feel like doing a pistols match, which then you're going to have a giant advantage using an AEP because yours is full auto unless they make you go semi-automatic. Now looking on the other side with these Desert Eagles, I also showed that AEPs have no recoil at all. Well, at least very little. It's only a very slight vibration. That's what she said. Whereas gas blowbacks, I know, is almost unfair to say with CO2 blowback because this thing has a lot of recoil. But blowbacks, obviously, you'll have to realign your sights. It takes just that little extra second in a game that can get you out. So what's the best? Which one is for you? Ultimately, it completely depends on what you do. None of these are better than the other in any way whatsoever. It just depends. If you live in a warmer environment and you like realism, chances are you're going to like the NS2 the best or just the standard blowback the best. Especially if you're on a budget standard blowback, if you have a little bit more, the NS2 is going to be best for you. If you live in a colder environment, CO2 is going to be a very good option. And if you live in a colder and moist environment, very semi-humid places like Portland and subtropical environments, say Portland or England, if you go to London, really it feels identical to here, so you know what I'm talking about. AEPs are probably going to be the best for you, unless you need to do milsim, and they probably won't even like you very much for using an AEP, and they'll probably force you to use semi-automatic. So really it depends on what you do. You can't say one's best from the other. All of them are going to get the job done. All of them are great designs. And the AEPs, I gotta say, it has a lot of manufacturing done to shrink a gearbox that much. I'm kind of surprised at how smart they were able to do these things. A little complicated, but more simple than I assumed they would, because things are normally complicated when they first do them in airsoft, at least electrically anyway. So once again, it all depends on what you want to do. They're all great options you look at. They all work fine, and it depends on where you live or what type of games you play. So I hope this has helped anyone that's been asking the question, what's the differences between all of them? Well, there's the pros, there's the cons. It's all up to you. Personally, myself, I'll stick with the AEPs, even though I like all of them. I like the blowback a lot, but for games, I like logic. In a place like this, it's just, you need something that'll work well in the cold, high moisture type environment. So once again, no choice is really wrong. Whatever you want, go ahead and feel like getting. There's nothing against any of them. So with that said, that should be the end of the video, and I will see all you guys later.